For as long as NFV has been a term in the industry, the ETSI NFV Industry Specification Group, or ISG, has been defining the roadmap for telco virtualization. I'm talking today with DOCOMO Euro-Labs Principal Network Architect, Joan Triay, who is Technical Manager at the ETSI NFV ISG. Juan, welcome, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your role.
Thanks a lot, Ray, for the introduction, and thanks a lot for having the opportunity to join this event. So yes, I'm Joan Triay. I'm based in Germany. I work for DOCOMO Euro-Labs, part of entity DOCOMO, and I'm a network architect. I have been deeply involved in NFV standards and NFV solutions already for some time. And as you will introduce, I'm also the technical manager of the ETSI ISG NFV. That is already for some time. And in addition to that, I also have a role doing active contributions and also a role as rapporteur of a number of work items. So as I said, very much involved in all NFV standards and developments currently.
Okay, great. So an excellent background for today's conversation. So can you just give us your view on just how relevant NFV is to today's telecom operator strategies? Because there are some who would suggest that maybe NFV is yesterday's telco cloud news. What's your view on that?
My view, and I think that also numbers talk about themselves, operators are definitely embracing NFV. I would say that therefore it's not old telco news. And of course, the level of deployments and developments of different operators are different in the sense that they were also trying to target potentially different use cases or trying to virtualize different parts of the network. But definitely, the number of deployments are ramping up, and also thanks, for example, to the recent deployments that are happening worldwide for the 5G. And as I said, numbers speak for themselves. So if my memory is not incorrect, back in 2018, I saw some statistics saying that only a fourth of the network operators were actually not having consideration or in their timeline VNF deployments. And more recent figures also show that the deployments, as I said, they are increasing. Some of them, it's true that some of them are at a smaller scale, but it's also very significant that a big number of operators are actually already deploying at very large scale. So considering these facts, I would say that it's a little bit misleading to say that NFV is all telco news, and it's there. One additional remark I would like to make is that maybe from my perception is that NFV maybe has been put into a very specific way to deliver network functions to operators and to deploy the networks. Whereas actually the reality is that NFV was envisioned for the very beginning, like more as a vision, not just as a single type of technology. And this is corroborated basically by the fact that as part of NFV, what we are also trying to do is make a common sense of many different underlying technologies. So in summary, I would say, and I kind of disagree that NFV is all telco news. So it is very much in the minds of network operators.
Absolutely, and that's what we are finding as well in our conversations with operators, and why indeed we're calling these sessions NFV evolution. So obviously, you know, the operators are not embracing NFV and virtualization just for the sake of it. So what benefits have operators been gaining from their investments in virtualization of their networks?
Okay, so again here it's a fact also that, as I said, there are different use cases that have been tackled by the network operators. So the number and the level of benefits that can be achieved are diverse in that sense. However, I would say that at large there is there are results about actual reduction in expenditure. There are cases of operators that are able to reduce capital expenditure, and some of the cases that are also able to reduce operational expenditure, or even both of them. And very clear examples are, for example, easier way to, for example, manage the field maintenance in the infrastructure. Also, some of the benefits, for example, have to do with being faster into deploying the network and providing services in a much faster way. Of course, here we could still improve, and there is room for improvement because we do know that the knowledge is underlying are actually supporting much faster deployments, but there is already substantial benefits there. And even if I, for example, explain for the case of my company that we also target trying to improve service delivery, improve the reliability of the network, making the network more economical. It is a fact actually that with our experience, we have seen benefits in all these different areas. And I would also like to mention and add that it's not only about actual figures and numbers that can be achieved. There is also an aspect that I would say that I don't like to discard, and it's actually the transformation that is also happening to the network operators. So operators who embrace NFV, who get used to manage softwareization of the network, are also embracing many other types of digital transformation. And very clear examples are, for example, complementary technologies that happen besides or together with NFV. Like, for example, introduction of artificial intelligence, for example, to handle some use cases about managing the network or providing additional services to the customers. And finally, there is also another benefit, and this probably is also not cannot be quantifiable. And it's also that it's opening up new innovation environments. And that allows to have more co-creation of services, more co-creation of solutions among the different stakeholders, including the network operators. And very clear examples of these are, for example, many different open source projects that are happening out there, trying to come up with actual implementable solutions of NFV. So there are, I would say, a very wide range of benefits. Some of them quantifiable, and some of them might not be quantifiable, but cannot be neglectable for the actual future of the operators.
Okay, great. Yes, and the stimulating innovation, of course, is a very key point, and something that all the operators are looking for. But of course, over the years, the introduction of virtualization and the deployment of NFV technologies has not always been easy. So have some of the key challenges like VNF onboarding and multi-vendor interoperability, have those largely been solved, or is there still work to do on some of those major challenges?
Okay, so situation has greatly improved, but there is still room for improvement. I would say that it has especially improved in terms of enabling capabilities to interoperate different vendor solutions. That is particularly applicable to the cases of NFV Mano solutions, being able to integrate solutions from different vendors on different types of layers of the management framework. That basically comes as a result of standard APIs that have been developed, number of specifications, for example, from ETSI NFV. There are a number of deployments that are already making use of them, and also numbers and figures and results that we get from the different interoperability events demonstrate also that there are more tests being executed, and at the same time, more tests that are also being executed successfully. So on the multi-vendor interoperability side, there is improvement, and things are looking on the right path. Maybe on the bad side is more the VNF onboarding process. That's true that there are still some operators who face issues on trying to onboard VNFs on the network. There are different reasons for that. We know that some VNFs have too much dependency on the characteristics of the infrastructure. Some of them also have very particular ways to be configured or very complex instantiation workflows. So that makes the VNF validation and end onboarding on the operator's network still a lengthy task, and there is still room for improvement. But I would say that there is hope here on this side because also new technologies that are being embraced into the NFV also facilitate the potential deployment of VNFs, and that I will also talk maybe later on.
Okay, excellent. And also a bit earlier on, you mentioned 5G as one of the catalysts for some of the developments at the operators. So how do NFV capabilities like the NFV infrastructure, virtual network functions, the Mano software, how do those functions and elements fit into operator 5G strategies?
Well, first of all, in my opinion, it's very difficult to dissociate 5G from NFV. I think that there are too many 5G characteristics that does not make sense if not being deployed on the principles of the operator having an NFV framework and infrastructure to be deployed. And of course, we know that characteristics of NFV, of 5G, like network slicing or the NFV services. And we are trying to embed, of course, all these characteristics to be better supported from NFV point of view. And if I follow the list of items that you indicated in your question, what we are doing basically is try to enhance and enrich the framework. This is not just only a matter of the specifications, it's also coming to the fact that it's the way that it's expected to be developed and integrated into the network. But for example, for the VNFs, what we are doing is to describe new ways to provide requirements for resources, taking into account that VNFs are also now being containerized. So they use containers for the deployment. We are also considering additional features on how to connect the actual VNFs to the network, leveraging also recent advances that are happening in terms of connectivity. And we are also extending and enhancing the specifications to be able to refer to other packaging artifacts that are used for delivering the 5G functions. And one of the prominent ones, for example, is the use of Helm. For the part of the NFV Mano, again, we are also enhancing it for the aspects of being able to manage and orchestrate containers. This is a very important aspect. It was not strictly precluded in the past in the specifications and in the framework, but since we know now also underlying technologies that are being used and how they are being used, we are enriching the framework to better cope with these new functionalities. And another aspect that we are also leveraging deeply in our framework for supporting 5G is, for example, also the reuse of the abstractions of the network services. And we have defined in the past network services, the composition of VNFs for the operators and how they are managed and life-cycled by the NFV Mano framework. And basically, we determined that the network services were the perfect fit for the deployment of network slices. And there were already many of the necessary requirements already being fulfilled, and we just had to do, for example, some extensions to address additional requirements of reliability or security. And for the last part of the NFVI, here again, also we do try to provide more clear and better support for new virtualization technologies for the container-based deployment. And basically, what we are trying to do with the NFVI is also knowing the fact that 5G, where the 5G functions can be deployed on the network, we are trying to make sure that the NFVI is not just only seen as a single pool of resources that are located, for example, in a central location. Indeed, are actually infrastructure that it's horizontal, it's end-to-end. It can cover any kind of deployment of functions at all different domains of the network, and even, for example, supporting the actual deployment of edge applications. So there are many different smaller aspects that we are trying to enhance to be better readiness, or make the NFV more readiness for 5G deployments. But maybe these are at large the most important aspects.
Okay, great. It sounds like the move to 5G is a catalyst for a lot of the activity. So, and you detail some very specific developments there. Are there any sort of more general overall trends that operators are looking for in terms of NFV advances and R&D efforts now? Any sort of, big areas where the operators are saying we definitely need focus in these major areas to help with the strategies?
Yes, so yeah, there are additional areas, not just container support. Some of the areas that operators are tackling refer to what we discussed before about facilitating the VNF onboarding. And here there are a couple of fronts that are being researched and discussed and investigated. One of them, for example, is how to add more CI/CD processes into the overall development pipeline, when in the development pipeline, but also into the deployment part of it, and also trying to add new capabilities on how to automate better the testing of the VNFs and so on. And the end result or expected result is to improve the overall development and deployment efficiency. And another aspect also that I can relate it to facilitate the VNF onboarding is also an area of research on trying to provide more platform-based capabilities for the actual development and deployment and operation of the VNFs. For example, when I refer to platform capabilities, we can maybe mimic as a PaaS, or platform as a service type of services. And basically here the objective is to make sure that the platform and the framework provides enough capabilities to facilitate the management and operation of the VNFs in a very generic and homogeneous way. One of the issues that some operators are facing is that even though they receive VNFs that look like the same, but when they are deployed, it's actually not the same. And when they are operated, they are also operated in many different ways. So we are trying to provide tools that would end facilitating, making things more generic and more common. And other aspects that are also being researched is try to decouple functionalities in the NFV MANO framework. There are certain dependencies in between the functional blocks, and some operators, what they are trying to do is make a better or a more clear definition of what are the services that NFV MANO provides and how these services can be consumed and interwork in between them, trying to make them loosely coupled as much as possible. And basically, I would say that these are the major trends that are happening right now.
Okay, excellent. So obviously, clearly, still a lot of work ongoing. And while some people might say NFV is over, it sounds in many ways like it's still in its infancy and has a long way to go. But of course, as NFV becomes a greater part of networks, so there is also the introduction, and you mentioned this before, of more cloud native developments as well, and the introduction of containers and the use of Kubernetes. So NFV and cloud native capabilities, that it looks like they're going to coexist. So will there be hybrid architectures that are able to manage virtual network functions and container-based microservices within the same platform, within the same MANOs and orchestrators?
Okay, on the first part, whether the coexist of NFV with cloud native, I fully understand that the word of cloud native is very much in use of everyone, but that's maybe more a personal opinion. But I prefer not to dissociate NFV from cloud native itself. In the NFV vision, we do also have cloudification in the DNA. So we just not envision from the very beginning that we were just talking about virtualization or even about a very specific single type of deployment. So from that point of view, I prefer to not consider whether there is a coexistence of NFV and cloud native. More to the question for me is more, when will be the time that we are going to actually receive solutions that take more cloud native principles into their DNA? And that is already happening right now. It's not something that is future research. Some solutions that operators are receiving already look into that direction. And therefore, I prefer to say that NFV is also cloud native. And precisely, for example, even though there is some use of terminology like CNFs and so on, from the perspective of NFV, we handle them all in the same way, or we expect to handle them all in the same way, whether there is a cloud native VNF or not a cloud native VNF. So in that aspect, NFV tries to also embrace cloud native for sure. For the aspect of hybrid architectures, I would also like to maybe potentially answer in two different ways. Also because I want to avoid any possible confusion, since I know that microservices sometimes are also used in a very determined and specific way. Sometimes they refer more like the actual microservices, loosely coupled services with simple interfaces, and other times it's referred as the actual container-based deployment. From the first perspective, there is no difference of hybrid architecture in our view. Basically, a VNF can map to a single microservice, or can be very big fat VNFs integrating very multiple number of microservices. So there is no restriction in that sense, and therefore there is no specific need to change the architecture to support that. That was already very well integrated in the past in the specifications we delivered. And if we look at from the perspective of container-based deployment, of course, in that sense, yes, we are kind of embedding into the architecture the support of both types of deployments, deployments that are more based on VMs and deployments that are based on containers, or even deployments that mix all of them, not just only at the level of network, like trying to interwork or integrate a VNF based on cloud containers and a VNF based on VMs, but even at the level that we might receive VNFs that have some components that are delivered as VMs, and they do not expose a particular type of services, and other components, for example, delivered with containers that might provide certain microservices and exposure of services. So even in that case, we do support this potential deployment option. So in summary, if I would go to the second question, I would look it into the different perspective that I explained. If we refer to the container-based, then yes, we are integrating and making this hybrid architecture able to cope with both type of deployments. If we look from the pure perspective of microservices, this was already in the DNA of NFV.
Okay, perfect, great, and thanks for explaining that and putting that in the total perspective. Fantastic. So it's 2020. NFV is coming on board. NFV deployments and investments are still growing and expanding and changing. So what is next for the ETSI NFV ISG? How is that evolving? Are more companies coming forward and getting involved? What can you tell us about what happens next with the ISG?
Well, next steps for the ISG. Maybe it's good to make a little bit of a summary. So we have been delivering releases. We went through the release 1, which was the first 2 years, and then we delivered specifications for release 2, release 3, and basically what we are doing now and the very immediate steps that are happening is fixing the set of features that will form what we call the release 4. And the motto that we use for this release 4 is actually enriching the framework to make it to add additional orchestration and cloudification, with the end objective to also make the operations and the framework more simple. So basically, we are trying to fix the set of features, and some of the features basically relate also to some of the research areas that I just mentioned in a previous question. Then more forward-looking topics, what we are, and this is still not official, but what we do expect, of course, is in the coming months to start discussing the future of the ISG in terms of new work that we have to cope with. We are going to start discussing with companies and proposals from companies and work items and so on, the features that will compose future releases. And in that sense, we are, of course, as always, being very keen and open to embrace new ideas and make sure that if there is any benefit about them, of course, to standardize and provide end solutions for the operators and all the industry stakeholders. And in terms of participation in ETSI NFV, the number of participants is being stable. And basically what we are also acknowledging the fact is that we do collaboration, we do collaborate also with other organizations, since we know that there are also activities that are happening, for example, in the open source and so on. And there are very good examples of interacting with these other organizations, for example, in terms of implementing the standards that we deliver. And this is, of course, something that we will continue to do in the future. So it's perfectly in our timeline.
Excellent. That's great. Well, there is plenty more work to do, so it's going to be really interesting to see how the next steps for the ISG evolve and what the community wants the ISG to focus on. So, Joan, thank you very much for a very comprehensive overview of what's going in the market. Really, really helpful, really detailed. So thanks very much for joining us today, and I hope you'll come back and give us an update in the not too distant future.
Thanks a lot, Ray. It was a pleasure. Yeah, you're welcome in the future. Thank you.